and welcome. Today we present our new episode of Disinfo Brief project conducted by Generation for Ukraine, dedicated to showcasing the danger of disinformation for democratic societies. And our esteemed guest today is Ambassador Vasyl Zvarych, Ambassador of Ukraine to the Czech Republic. Mr. Zvarych, could you please tell us about your background prior to becoming the ambassador?
Thank you so much. Thank you for this project. I appreciate it very much because it touches upon a very important topic of disinformation. My background, I'm a career diplomat. I started my diplomatic career back in 1999 after graduation from the Lviv University International Relations Department. So since 1999 I work for the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine. I work in Kyiv and in different places all over the world. So among them is Poland, United States, Turkey. It was my first posting abroad. We usually say that the first posting is like a first love for the diplomat. You will never forget it. So basically, I think that it was very useful for my experience. And before coming to Czech Republic, I was an ambassador of Ukraine to the Republic of Poland. And now, almost 2 years, I work here in Prague, and I enjoy it very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. That's quite a diverse portfolio. And let's proceed to our first question. So, being the official source of information about Ukraine in the Czech Republic, do you feel that there are malign narratives spread within the public space? And talking about the exact narratives, are they more targeting Ukrainians as a group within the Czech society, or they aim to change the perception of the Russian aggression by the Czechs?
First of all, we should take into consideration the basic facts that we are in a warfare. So the Russian Federation started the aggression, the military full-scale aggression against Ukraine. But it is a kind of hybrid aggression as well, because it's a combination of military instruments and, of course, hybrid instruments, including the disinformation and propaganda. I remember when it all started with the occupation of Crimea in 2014. So before that, we were targeted by enormous attacks, disinformation attacks in Ukraine and all over the world, because Russians, they were preparing the ground for further escalation, for further military actions, for further illegal attempts of occupation and so on. So usually it goes like this, that before tanks, the information comes. And now we gained a lot of experience how to tackle this Russian propaganda, disinformation campaigns. And yes, here in Czechia, like in all other countries all over the world, Russians are trying to manipulate, to spread fear among society, to spread distrust towards Ukrainians, or kind of fatigue with this support of Ukrainians. And it's obvious, and we understand how they act in this respect. So definitely the basic narratives that they spread is about some negative emotions towards Ukrainians, that Ukrainians are taking their jobs, Ukrainians are lowering the level of education at schools, and everything what is bad. So they try to connect with Ukrainians, which is not the case, because the facts are quite the opposite. Because Ukrainians here, they contribute to the state budget, they pay more than the state budget gives them as social help, assistance, and so on. But this is the logic of disinformation and propaganda campaigns, not to be based on facts, but to spread negative emotions and to spread distrust and fatigue regarding Ukrainians. And it also connected to the very basic issue to make harm to the general support by Czechia of Ukraine, because to undermine this support is the basic idea and basic objective of the Russian propaganda machinery.
So this narrative has a clear objective in practice.
Sure, absolutely. In times of war, The objective is very clear. So Russians want to undermine not only support of Czechia towards Ukraine, but to undermine the unity of European Union and the unity of the entire democratic world, because this is how this KGB machinery works. To undermine, to spread fear, chaos, to divide and rule.
That's very true. Yeah. So on to our next question. From your perspective, which are the most common ways Russian disinformation enters Czech public space?
They are quite sufficient in this disinformation campaigns. They basically use social media platforms, different ones. They use bots factories just to spread negative information or to spread hatred towards Ukrainians. They use also some political figures to spread the Russian narratives. So they use the combination of methods and instruments to make influence on the public mood, and that's really very, very dangerous. That's very dangerous. That's why we should do our best to raise the public awareness about the disinformation campaigns, propaganda by Russian federations. And I do appreciate what you are doing, because you are doing this, spreading and increasing the public awareness about this topic, about this issue. And I think that if we work together in all the parts of society, it doesn't mean that only Ukrainian embassy or some state institutions should tackle the issue of disinformation. This is the subject that must unite all of us. It's like, you know, that the security issues is not only about military people and about armed forces. The security issues are about the entire societies, the unity of all around the basic principles.
Definitely, we should use the all-of-society approach to try to counter different threats. But talking about doing our best, is it the Embassy of Ukraine's common job to fight disinformation? And if yes, what tools and methods do you use?
Yeah, it's our daily and nightly business, first and foremost, because we monitor the information space very closely. We pick up all the narratives which are linked to Russian propaganda and disinformation. We do fact-checking. We cooperate very closely with state institutions of Czechia, especially when we see some dangerous attempts to spread some false news, false information about Ukraine and about Ukrainians, so we interfere immediately. We work closely with non-governmental sector, different organizations. We work closely with influencers who are active on the social media and the platforms. So it's a variety of instruments that we also have, and as I said at the beginning, now we know how to tackle Russian propaganda. We became more sophisticated and more knowledgeable about how it works. And I think that in this information warfare, Ukraine is showing quite good results.
Thank you. And talking about some bit maybe specifics that are very interesting to our viewers, could you share one example of such situation and how you responded to it?
Well, I shared the one at the very beginning, the spread of the false narratives that Ukrainians are taking jobs and lowering the level of education at schools and so on. So we interfered immediately, and I myself spoke with plenty of state officials, and a lot of fact-checkings appeared on the internet, showing the real numbers and the real facts about the contribution of Ukrainians who are working legally here in Czechia to the state budget of Czechia, that Ukrainians are not the burden, they are really the asset for the Czech economy. And we also engaged some influencers who also spread this information, and we as embassy did a couple of video reels about successful Ukrainians who managed, for a short period of time, when they flew Ukraine because of Russian aggression, they came to Czechia, and for a short period of time they managed to not only to pass all the exam, to prove their qualifications here in Czechia, but they managed to get a good job, like doctors, like teachers, and they are now really helping Czech people. They are working in healthcare system, they working in education system. So Ukrainian teachers educate Czech children of mathematics, foreign languages, etc., etc. So I think that these examples and the best tool of how to tackle Russian propaganda is truth. So we should speak truth, and we should provide the society with genuine, real facts on the ground. And I think that the biggest part of the Czech society understands very well that what is at stake with Ukraine now, and how important it is to continue supporting Ukraine in this defensive, in fact, fight against Russian aggression.
Hopefully so. But it is very often that the opinion of the society depends on the way the government communicates. So that transitions us to our next question. Would you say there has been a change in the way Czech government conducts their strategic communication after parliamentary election? If yes, is it better, or is it for the better or for the worse in terms of providing true and reliable information and fighting disinformation?
The change of government we perceive as new opportunities for us. I can see that they are maybe less vocal about Ukraine nowadays, but it doesn't mean that it is for the worse. So we'll see, because sometimes it's more important, not words, but deeds are more important. And sometimes we can do even better, or we can do even more when we are not very much outspoken about what we are doing. So this is also the logic that I see in current government. So we do appreciate everything what the previous government did for Ukraine. It was enormously intensive work with the previous government, and I can confirm that even with current government, so there is some difference in approaches. We also achieved a lot already with the major issues that are dear to us and that are very important for our security and national interests. So this is my answer. I see, as I said, the difference perhaps in being less vocal about Ukraine, but it doesn't mean that the current government is less effective or less efficient in terms of security issues and in terms of support for Ukraine.
Thank you for your answer. So the next question is, in your view, is there anything missing in the Ukraine's official communication on the state level that makes Czech public space more vulnerable about disinformation about Ukraine? Do you think it can be improved somehow?
Yeah, there's always room for improvement in all subjects, in all fields. What is missing? Perhaps it's not our mistake, or it's not on us, but generally the society, not only in Czechia, but society really want to close their eyes and not to see what's going on in Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. Because it's very difficult to switch the society mood on the war mode, so to say. And it's easy perhaps for a lot of people not to think about what's going on in Ukraine, because every second you start thinking about Ukraine or you start talking about Ukraine, you start talking about Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It causes a lot of harm, it causes a lot of human sufferings, a lot of victims, and it's normal that the people don't want to hear a lot about it. But it doesn't mean that the society overall doesn't want to support Ukraine. Especially here in Czechia, the history is very alive, and Czech people, they remember what it means to be under the foreign occupation, under the Soviet occupation. The people here in Czechia, they do remember 1938, when some big powers, European powers, decided for Czech people to get rid of part of the territory, and they thought that it may help them to achieve peace, but in fact, it also it only brought the bigger war to the continent. So I think that all these examples, historic examples, are present here, and that helps us to, in our communication with the Czech people, to ensure a better understanding what's going on in Ukraine and what is at stake, and how important it is for Ukraine and for the entire Europe to win this war.
I see. It is very important to draw parallels between the
Absolutely.
Czech and Ukrainian context in different historical times. So, and about a bit about your background as an ambassador in Poland. Would you say that there is any major difference between the Czech and Polish context in terms of spread of the malign narratives? Do you think that narratives differ and maybe topics are different?
Russian disinformation machinery is quite sophisticated, as I said, and they do make a tailor-made approach to each and every country, how to touch upon emotions of the people living there. In Poland, of course, they use a historic background of our tragic history between Ukrainians and Poles in Volyn. So they use it very effectively to spread these negative emotions and to harm our bilateral relations. And we see it in every corner of Poland nowadays, especially. Here in Czechia, we don't have this historical burden on our relations. And that's why Russians are trying to use some other narratives to influence the public perception of Ukrainians. Basically, they use the map of or the card of Ukrainian migrants here, so they're trying to pick up some cases with the criminality of Ukrainians and so on, and they are spreading this information as a threat to the Czech society. Somehow, that's how they function here. Because usually, the Czech people they want to live in calm environment. This famous word in Czech language, klid. They want to live in klid all the time, and when they face some kind of information about the threat to their calm environment, so they are becoming more and more embarrassed about it. So basically, yes, tailor-made approach is the feature of the Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns nowadays.
And in Poland, history is much more important for their narratives.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think we should work together with Poland to kind of understand our shared history.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
reconcile.
And we are very, very open to that. We've initiated the Forum of Historians because we are of the opinion that the history, first and foremost, should be for historical professional debates based on facts and not misinterpretations of facts. And we've done a huge job together with Poles, starting from 90s, and a lot of examples of reconciliation took place between our nations. So I'm quite optimistic about the future of our relations with Poland. History shouldn't divide us. History should unite us. That's the basic logic that we should proceed with.
Absolutely. And my final and maybe the shortest question: what may be the important point that we haven't covered in the questions that you would like to speak about?
I would like to add my deepest gratitude and appreciation to the Czech people, to the Czech president, government, parliament, for the genuine support for Ukraine and Ukrainians living here. I should say that Ukrainians are here, are very well organized and very well integrated into the Czech society, which doesn't mean that they are assimilated, that we are against the assimilation of Ukrainians here. That's true. And they are not the burden for the Czech economy. They are an advantage for them. And I am very much confident that by working together with Ukraine nowadays, the Czech government will bring more benefits to the Czech society and to the Czech state. So our strategic partnership really is based on the mutual benefits. And we always encourage our Czech friends to come to Ukraine, to see how Ukrainians live, how they resist, and at the same time how they are enjoying their life in Ukraine.
Thank you so much. And we from Generation for Ukraine join in that gratitude and that hope for future partnership. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for
partnership as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining our interview.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your initiative and thank you for everything you're doing.